The mirror showed nothing but shadows and candlelight, yet Cordelia Ashmore knew someone watched from the other side. She had felt the weight of unseen eyes for 3 nights now, a presence that made the fine hairs on her neck rise even as she sat alone in her bedchamber. On the fourth night, when she turned from her writing desk to face the ornate looking-glass her late husband had commissioned, a voice emerged from its silvered depths, low, ancient, and utterly impossible. "You write the same letter every evening," the voice said, neither male nor female, but something between. "Yet you never send it." Cordelia's hand flew to her throat, her pulse hammering against her palm. The candles guttered, their flames bending toward the mirror as though drawn by invisible breath. In the glass, shadows coalesced into the suggestion of a figure, tall, draped in darkness that seemed to move independently of any light source. "Who are you?" Her voice emerged steadier than she felt, years of managing her late husband's estate having trained her to meet the unexpected with composure. "What manner of spirit haunts my mirror?" "No spirit." The shadows in the glass shifted, and for a moment she glimpsed the outline of a face, sharp cheekbones, eyes that reflected the candlelight like a cat's. "I am something far older than ghosts, Mrs. Ashmore, and I have been watching you wrestle with your decision for long enough." 3 months earlier, the letter had arrived that changed everything. Cordelia had been reviewing the quarterly accounts in the library of Ashmore Hall when her steward, Mr. Pemberton, brought the correspondence on a silver tray. The seal was unfamiliar, a raven clutching a rose, pressed into black wax that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the afternoon light. "From London, madam," Pemberton said, his weathered face betraying nothing of the curiosity she knew he must feel. "The messenger insisted it required your immediate attention." She broke the seal with her letter opener, the blade sliding through the wax with surprising resistance. The paper inside was thick, expensive, and bore a single paragraph in elegant script. "Mrs. Cordelia Ashmore, your husband's debts did not die with him. The Covenant of Shadows holds his marker for £17,000, due in full by Michaelmas. Failure to pay will result in the forfeiture of Ashmore Hall and all its holdings. You have until the autumn equinox to settle this account or to offer alternative compensation. We await your reply at the address below." The signature was illegible, a flourish of ink that might have been initials or simply decoration. But the address was clear enough. Number 47, Blackfriars Lane, London. Cordelia read the letter 3 times, each reading making her hands shake more violently. £17,000. Her husband had left her the estate, yes, but also a tangle of debts she had spent 2 years carefully untangling. She had thought herself finally free, finally able to breathe without the weight of his profligacy crushing her. Now this. "Madam?" Pemberton's voice pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. "Is all well?" "Perfectly well," she lied, folding the letter with hands that barely cooperated. "Thank you, Pemberton. That will be all." When he left, she sat in the silence of the library, surrounded by books her husband had never read and furniture he had never paid for, and felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. She could sell the estate, perhaps, but it would fetch nowhere near £17,000 in its current state. She could appeal to her husband's family, but they had disowned him years ago and would sooner see her destitute than lift a finger to help. Or she could go to London and face this covenant of shadows, whatever that meant, and negotiate for more time. That evening, she began writing the letter. Not to the covenant, she would face them in person if she must, but to her sister in Bath, explaining what had happened and asking her to take custody of Ashmore Hall should Cordelia fail to return. She wrote it carefully, precisely, trying to find words that would convey both her love and her fear without causing undue alarm. And every night since, she had rewritten it, never quite satisfied, never quite ready to send it and make her situation real. until the mirror spoke. Now, standing in her bedchamber with her heart racing and the impossible voice still echoing in her ears, Cordelia made a decision. If spirits, or whatever this was, could speak to her through mirrors, then perhaps the world contained more possibilities than she had imagined, perhaps even a way out of her predicament. "You say you have been watching me," she said, addressing the shadows in the glass. "Then you know my circumstances. Can you help me?" The figure in the mirror shifted, and she heard what might have been a laugh. "Help you? I can do far more than that, Cordelia Ashmore. But first, you must come to London. The covenant awaits, and your time grows short. You are connected to them, to this covenant of shadows?" "I am the covenant," the voice said, and now she could see more of the face in the glass. Pale skin, dark hair, and those strange reflective eyes. "Or rather, I am its lord, and your husband's debt is mine to collect." Cordelia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Then why speak to me at all? Why not simply take what you claim is owed?" "Because you interest me." The shadows in the mirror drew back slightly, revealing more of the figure's form. A man, she thought, though something about him seemed fundamentally wrong in ways she could not articulate. "You are not what I expected. Most widows in your position would have wept, or fled, or sought a wealthy protector. You have done none of these things. Instead, you write letters you do not send and manage an estate you cannot afford to keep, and you do it all with a spine of steel and a mind like a merchant's ledger. Such women are rare." "Flattery will not reduce the debt." "No," he agreed, "but cooperation might. Come to London, Cordelia Ashmore. Come to Blackfriars Lane before Michaelmas. I promise you will leave with either a solution to your problems or at least a clear understanding of what must be done." "And if I refuse?" The candles flared suddenly, their flames shooting up in blue-white columns that cast the room in harsh, flickering light. In the mirror, the figure's eyes blazed red for just an instant before returning to their reflective gleam. "Then I will come to you," he said softly, "and I assure you that would be far less pleasant for us both." The flames died. The mirror showed only her own reflection, pale and wide-eyed in the candlelight. Cordelia stood frozen for a long moment, her mind racing through possibilities and impossibilities, through fear and fury, and a strange, unexpected curiosity. Then she turned back to her desk, took up her pen, and began writing a different letter entirely. London in September was a city of contrasts: gleaming carriages splashing through muddy streets, fine ladies stepping over beggars, the smell of coal smoke and horse dung mixing with expensive perfumes. Cordelia arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, having left Ashmore Hall in Pemberton's capable hands and taken the mail coach with only a single trunk and her determination for company. Blackfriars Lane proved difficult to find. The cab driver she hired at the coaching inn claimed never to have heard of it, and only after she offered him double his usual fare did he reluctantly agree to search. They drove through increasingly narrow streets, the buildings growing older and more decrepit, until finally the driver stopped before a row of Georgian townhouses that looked as though they predated the lane itself. "Number 47, he said, pointing to a house in the middle of the row. "Though I cannot say I have ever noticed it before, madam, and I have driven these streets for 20 years. Cordelia paid him and stepped down, her traveling dress already dusty from the journey. The house before her was tall and narrow, its windows dark despite the afternoon hour. The door was painted black, and the brass knocker was shaped like a raven with a rose in its beak, the same symbol from the letter's seal. She lifted the knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed strangely, as though the house were far larger inside than its facade suggested. The door opened immediately, revealing a young woman in a maid's uniform who looked no more than 25. Her eyes were an unusual shade of amber, and when she smiled, Cordelia glimpsed teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp. "Mrs. Ashmore," the maid said, as though Cordelia's arrival had been expected to the minute. "His lordship is waiting for you in the study. Please, follow me." The interior of the house was dim and cool, the walls paneled in dark wood that absorbed what little light came through the curtained windows. Cordelia followed the maid up a staircase that seemed to spiral longer than the house's exterior would allow, past closed doors from behind which she heard whispers and rustling that might have been wind or might have been something else entirely. The study was on the third floor, a room lined with books from floor to ceiling, and dominated by a massive desk of carved ebony. Behind the desk sat a man who looked perhaps 30 years old, with pale skin, dark hair that fell to his shoulders, and eyes that caught the lamplight with that same reflective gleam she had seen in the mirror. He stood when she entered, moving with a fluid grace that made her think of predators. He was tall, dressed in black save for a white cravat, and when he smiled, she saw the same two sharp teeth the maid had displayed. "Mrs. Ashmore," he said, his voice the same one that had spoken from her mirror. "Welcome to the Covenant. I am Lord Silvius Ravenscourt, and I am very pleased you decided to accept my invitation." Cordelia remained standing near the door, her reticule clutched in both hands. "I came for answers, Lord Ravenscourt. My husband never mentioned any debt to your organization, and I find the sum you claim rather convenient given the estate's current value." "Direct," Ravenscourt said, approval coloring his tone. "I appreciate that. Please, sit. This conversation may take some time." She sat, though she kept her spine straight and her feet planted firmly on the floor, ready to flee if necessary. Ravenscourt resumed his seat and steepled his fingers, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Your husband came to us 5 years ago," he said. "He had gambling debts he could not pay, creditors who threatened violence, and a wife whose dowry he had already spent. We offered him a loan at very favorable terms, no interest, no payment required for 5 years, and only one condition." "Which was?" "That if he died before the debt was repaid, his widow would come to London and hear our proposal for alternative compensation." Ravenscourt leaned forward slightly. "He was quite confident he would live long enough to repay us. He was wrong." Cordelia's hands tightened on her reticule. "What sort of alternative compensation?" "That depends on what you are willing to offer." Ravenscourt's eyes never left her face. "The Covenant of Shadows is not a lending institution, Mrs. Ashmore. We are something far older and far stranger. We deal in debts that transcend mere money, debts of blood, of loyalty, of service. Your husband borrowed £17,000. You could repay that sum in coin if you had it, or you could repay it in other ways. Such as a year of your life, for instance, 12 months in service to the Covenant, performing such tasks as we require. At the end of that year, the debt would be cleared, and you would be free to return to your estate." Cordelia felt her stomach twist. "What manner of tasks?" "Nothing that would compromise your virtue or your safety," Ravenscourt said. "We would require you to act as our agent in certain social circles, to gather information, to facilitate introductions. The Covenant operates in the shadows of society, Mrs. Ashmore. We need eyes and ears in the light." "You want me to spy for you?" "We want you to observe for us. There is a difference." He stood and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to reveal the street below. "The world is changing, Mrs. Ashmore. The old powers are waning, and new forces are rising. The Covenant seeks to maintain balance, to ensure that neither side gains too much advantage. Your position as a respectable widow with connections to both the gentry and the merchant class makes you uniquely valuable to us." Cordelia rose as well, her mind working through the implications. "And if I refuse? Then the debt stands, and Ashmore Hall becomes property of the Covenant." Ravenscourt turned to face her, and in the dimness of the room, his eyes seemed to glow faintly. "But I do not think you will refuse, Cordelia Ashmore. I think you are too practical for that, and I think perhaps you are curious about what we truly are." "I know what you are," Cordelia said quietly. "I have read enough folklore to recognize the signs. You are vampire." The word landed between them like a stone in still water between them. Ravenscourt smiled, and this time there was no hiding the elongated canines. "Very perceptive," he said. "Yes, we are vampire. The covenant is composed of my kind, those who have lived for centuries, who remember when the world was younger and stranger. We do not prey on humans, Mrs. Ashmore. We protect them in our way. We maintain the balance between the mortal world and the supernatural one. And we require mortal agents to do so, because there are places even we cannot go, conversations even we cannot have." Cordelia's pulse beat visibly at the base of her throat, but she forced herself to remain still, to meet his gaze without flinching. "Why did you watch me through the mirror? Why not simply summon me to London with the letter?" "Because I wanted to see how you would react to the impossible," Ravenscourt said. "I wanted to know if you would run, or if you would stand your ground. You did the latter, Cordelia Ashmore. You faced the unknown with courage and curiosity. That is why I believe you will accept my offer." She took a breath, considering. A year of her life in exchange for her freedom. A year of serving creatures she had thought existed only in stories. It should have been an easy decision. She should have fled this house and never looked back. But Ashmore Hall was all she had. It was her home, her security, her independence. Without it, she would be at the mercy of relatives who had never approved of her marriage, who would see her reduced to a poor relation dependent on their charity. And beneath the fear, beneath the practical considerations, there was something else. A spark of curiosity, of excitement even. The world had suddenly become larger and stranger than she had ever imagined. How could she turn away from that? "I accept," she said. "1 year of service in exchange for the debt. But I have conditions." Ravenscourt's smile widened. "Name them." "I will not harm innocents. I will not participate in anything that violates my conscience. And I will know the full truth of what I am asked to do before I agree to any specific task." "Agreed." Ravenscourt extended his hand. "Shall we seal this bargain properly?" Cordelia hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His skin was cool, his grip firm, and when their palms met, she felt a strange tingling sensation, as though something had passed between them, some exchange of energy or promise that went deeper than mere words. "Welcome to the covenant, Cordelia Ashmore," Ravenscourt said. "Your year begins now." The first task came 3 days later, after Ravenscourt had installed her in a comfortable set of rooms in the house on Blackfriars Lane and provided her with a wardrobe suitable for London society. She was to attend a ball at the home of Viscount Pemberley, where a certain Mr. Jonathan Graves would be present. Her task was simple: engage him in conversation, determine his opinion on the recent railway expansion proposals, and report back to Ravenscourt. It seemed innocuous enough, though Cordelia could not fathom why Vampire would care about railway expansion. Still, she had agreed to serve, and so she would. The ball was a glittering affair, the Pemberley mansion ablaze with candlelight and crowded with the cream of London society. Cordelia wore a gown of deep blue silk that the Covenant seamstress had created in a single day, an impossibility that suggested the woman was either Vampire herself or employed supernatural means. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, years of managing her husband's social obligations having taught her how to navigate such gatherings. Mr. Graves proved easy to identify, a portly man in his 50s with mutton-chop whiskers and a booming laugh. She maneuvered herself into his vicinity during the supper interval and engaged him in conversation about the weather, the quality of the refreshments, and finally, the railways. "Monstrous things," Graves declared, his face reddening with passion. "Tearing up the countryside, disrupting the natural order. Mark my words, madam, no good will come of letting these iron horses run wild across England. The old ways are best. Coaches, horses, proper travel at a proper pace." Cordelia made appropriate murmurs of interest, drawing him out further. He spoke at length about his investments in coaching inns, about his fear that the railways would destroy the traditional transport industry, about his plans to lobby Parliament against further expansion. When she returned to Blackfriars Lane that evening, Ravenscourt was waiting in the study, a glass of what looked like red wine in his hand. She reported Graves's opinions faithfully, and Ravenscourt nodded thoughtfully. "He is more opposed than we anticipated," he said. "That complicates matters." "Why do you care about railways?" Cordelia asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "What possible interest could Vampire have in mortal transportation?" Ravenscourt set down his glass. She noticed he had not actually drunk from it, and regarded her with those unsettling, reflective eyes. "Because railways change everything, Cordelia. They allow humans to move faster, to travel farther, to connect distant places in ways that were impossible before. That changes the balance of power. It makes it harder for us to maintain our secrecy, our separation from the mortal world. If humans can travel from London to Edinburgh in a single day, how long before they start noticing the patterns? The families who never age, the estates that remain unchanged for generations, the disappearances that follow certain routes? She had not considered that. "So you oppose the railways?" "No. We adapt to them, as we have adapted to every change in human society for millennia. But we must know who our allies and enemies are in this new world. Graves is an enemy. He will fight the railways, and in doing so, he will slow the change we need to prepare for. We must find ways to counter his influence." "You want me to spy on him further?" "I want you to befriend him." Ravenscourt leaned back in his chair. "You are a widow with an estate to manage. He is a man with investments in coaching inns. There are natural points of connection. Cultivate his acquaintance, learn his plans, and report them to me. Can you do that?" Cordelia considered. It felt dishonest, manipulative. But then, Graves was a stranger to her, and his opposition to progress seemed rooted in selfishness rather than principle, and she had made a bargain. "I can," she said. Over the following weeks, Cordelia became a fixture in London society, attending balls and dinners, cultivating acquaintances, gathering information. She befriended Mr. Graves and his wife, a timid woman who seemed grateful for Cordelia's company. She learned about his business dealings, his political connections, his plans to form a coalition of coaching inn owners to lobby against railway expansion. She reported everything to Ravenscourt, who listened with the focused intensity of a predator tracking prey. Sometimes he asked questions, probing for details she had not thought significant. Other times he simply nodded and dismissed her, retreating into his study to consult with other members of the Covenant, pale, elegant men and women who arrived after dark and left before dawn. Cordelia found herself falling into a strange routine. Her days were spent in the social whirl of London, playing the role of respectable widow. Her evenings were spent in the house on Blackfriars Lane, reporting to Ravenscourt, and occasionally glimpsing the true nature of the Covenant. The hushed meetings, the ancient books in languages she did not recognize, the sense of vast age and power that permeated the house. And gradually, despite herself, she began to see Ravenscourt as something more than a monster holding her in thrall. He was unfailingly courteous, never threatening, never cruel. He asked her opinion on matters beyond her assigned tasks, seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts on politics, literature, the changing world. He had a dry wit that surprised her, and a melancholy that suggested rooms within rooms, each more empty than the last. One evening in October, after she had reported on a particularly tedious dinner party, he surprised her by asking, "Do you regret accepting my offer, Cordelia?" She paused, considering the question honestly. "No," she said finally. "I thought I would. I thought I would feel trapped, coerced, but instead I feel alive. More alive than I have felt in years. Is that strange?" "Not strange at all." Ravenscourt rose from his desk and moved to the window, as was his habit when troubled. "Mortality is a cage as much as immortality, Cordelia. You have been trapped by circumstance, by duty, by the expectations of your society. This year of service has freed you from those expectations, at least temporarily. You are no longer merely a widow managing an estate. You are an agent of the covenant, moving through the world with purpose and power. Is that how you see yourself? Powerful? He laughed, a sound without humor. I see myself as what I am, a creature out of time, trying to maintain relevance in a world that no longer needs monsters. We were once necessary, Cordelia. We kept the balance between the mortal and supernatural worlds. But those worlds are separating now, drifting apart. Soon there will be no more magic, no more mystery, only railways and telegraphs and the cold light of science. What place will there be for vampire then? Cordelia rose and moved to stand beside him at the window. Below, the street was dark and empty, the gas lamps casting pools of yellow light that did not quite reach the shadows between. Perhaps you will find new purposes, she said quietly. Perhaps the world will always need those who remember the old ways, who can bridge the gap between past and present. Ravenscourt turned to look at her, and in the dimness, his eyes seemed to glow with their own light. You are a remarkable woman, Cordelia Ashmore. I chose well when I brought you into the covenant. You did not choose me, she said. My husband's debt chose me. No. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his cool fingers sending a shiver through her. I chose you. I could have collected the debt in other ways. I could have taken the estate and left you to your fate. But I watched you through that mirror, and I saw someone who deserved better than the hand life had dealt her. Someone who could be more than she was allowed to be. So I gave you this opportunity, Cordelia, and you have exceeded every expectation. His hand lingered on her cheek, and Cordelia felt her breath catch. She should step back, should maintain the proper distance between employer and servant, between vampire and human. But she did not want to. She wanted to lean into that cool touch, to close the distance between them, to discover what it would feel like to be held by someone who had lived for centuries and still found her remarkable. Before she could act on the impulse, a sharp knock sounded at the study door. Ravenscourt dropped his hand and stepped back, his expression smoothing into neutrality. Enter, he called. The door opened to reveal a vampire Cordelia had not seen before, a woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. She wore a traveling cloak still dusty from the road, and her face was grim. Silvius, she said, ignoring Cordelia entirely. We have a problem. The Blackwood Circle has learned about your mortal agent. They are coming to London, and they are not pleased. Ravenscourt's expression hardened. When? 3 days, perhaps less. They claim you have violated the Covenant's charter by involving a human in our affairs so deeply. They demand her surrender for judgment. Cordelia felt ice flood her veins. What does that mean? What judgment? The silver-haired woman finally looked at her, and there was no warmth in those pale eyes. It means they will examine your memories to determine what you have learned, and then they will decide whether you are too dangerous to be allowed to live. That is enough, Isolde, Ravenscourt said sharply. Cordelia is under my protection. The Blackwood Circle has no authority over her. They have authority over you, Silvius. You are still bound by the old laws, whether you like it or not. And those laws forbid exactly what you have done, bringing a mortal into our confidence, revealing our nature, using her as an agent in our affairs. Isolde's voice was cold, implacable. You knew this would come. You chose to do it anyway. Now you must face the consequences. Ravenscourt moved between Cordelia and Isolde, his body tense with suppressed violence. I will not surrender her to the Circle. If they want her, they will have to go through me. That can be arranged. Isolde turned to leave, then paused at the door. You have 3 days to prepare your defense, Silvius. I suggest you use them wisely. When she was gone, Cordelia sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. What have you done? She whispered. What have you involved me in? Ravenscourt knelt before her, taking her trembling fingers in his. I have involved you in a conflict that has been brewing for decades, Cordelia. The Covenant is divided. Some of us, like Isolde and the Blackwood Circle, believe we must maintain absolute separation from humanity. They think any involvement with mortals beyond feeding is a violation of our nature. Others, like myself, believe we must adapt or die, that we must find ways to coexist with humanity as the world changes. I brought you into the covenant not just to gather information, but to prove that mortals and vampire can work together, can trust each other. And instead you have put me in mortal danger. Yes. He did not try to deny it. I am sorry, Cordelia. I should have warned you of the risk, but I did not think the circle would move so quickly or so decisively. Cordelia pulled her hands from his and stood, pacing the length of the study. Her mind raced, considering options, calculating odds. What will they do to me if they take me? They will drain your memories, which is painful but not fatal. Then they will debate your fate. Some will argue for your death to ensure your silence. Others may argue for your transformation to bind you to the covenant permanently. A few might argue for mercy, erasing your memories and sending you home. And which is most likely? Ravenscourt's silence was answer enough. Cordelia stopped pacing and turned to face him. Then we must ensure they do not take me. What are our options? We can flee London, hide you somewhere the circle cannot find you. But that would only delay the inevitable. They have centuries to search, and you have only a mortal lifetime to hide. What else? I can challenge the circle's authority, force them to recognize you as under my protection. But that would require me to claim you formally, to bind you to me in a way that even the old laws cannot break. What kind of binding? Ravenscourt met her eyes, and she saw a nakedness in his face that made her breath catch, fear, hope, longing, all mixed together. Marriage, Cordelia. If you were my wife, the circle could not touch you without declaring war on me directly. You would be under my protection absolutely, bound by laws older than the covenant itself. Cordelia stared at him. You are proposing marriage? To save me from your own kind? I am proposing marriage because I do not want to lose you. He stood, moving toward her with that fluid grace that marked him as something other than human. These past weeks, Cordelia, you have become more to me than an agent, more than a mortal I am using for my purposes. You have become someone I look forward to seeing each evening, someone whose opinions I value, whose presence brings light into this house of shadows. I do not want the circle to take you. I do not want to lose what we have found together. What have we found? Cordelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You are a vampire, Silvius. I am human. What future could we possibly have? Whatever future we choose to make. He took her hands again, and this time she did not pull away. I can offer you protection, Cordelia. I can offer you a life beyond the constraints of mortal society. I can offer you centuries instead of decades, if you choose transformation. Or I can offer you a mortal lifetime of partnership, of equality, of love. But I cannot offer you safety if you remain merely my agent. The circle will come, and they will take you, and I will not be able to stop them, unless you are bound to me in a way they cannot break. Cordelia looked into his eyes, those strange, reflective eyes that had watched her through a mirror and seen something worth saving. She thought of Ashmore Hall, of the life she had left behind, of the year of service she had agreed to. She thought of the impossible world she had discovered, the creatures of legend who walked among mortals and tried to maintain balance in a changing world. And she thought of the man before her, ancient, powerful, lonely, who had chosen her not because of her beauty or her wealth, but because she had faced the impossible with courage and curiosity. If I agree, she said slowly, what would this marriage look like? Would you expect me to transform? To become vampire? Only if you wished it. I would never force that choice upon you, Cordelia. If you prefer to remain mortal, to live out your natural span, I would accept that. It would mean I would outlive you, that I would have to watch you age and die while I remained unchanged. But I would accept that pain if it meant having you with me for whatever time we could share. And if I chose transformation? Then we would have centuries together. You would become vampire with all that entails, the strength, the longevity, the need for blood. But you would also retain yourself, your humanity, your soul. Transformation does not erase who you are, Cordelia. It only changes the vessel that contains you. She pulled her hands from his and moved to the window, looking out at the dark street below. 3 days. She had 3 days to decide whether to bind herself to this creature, to accept a marriage that would be real in every legal and supernatural sense, to step fully into a world she had only begun to understand. Or she could refuse, could take her chances with the circle, could hope for mercy from vampire who saw her as a threat to their secrecy. It was not really a choice at all. I accept, she said, turning to face him. I will marry you, Silvius Ravenscourt, but not just to save myself from the circle. I accept because you are right. We have found something together these past weeks. Something I did not expect and do not fully understand, but something real nonetheless. If marriage is the only way to protect that, then I will marry you. Ravenscourt crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. His embrace was cool but not cold, strong but not crushing. He held her as though she were something precious, something he had been searching for across centuries and finally found. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. I will not fail you, Cordelia. I swear it. The wedding took place 2 nights later, in the house on Blackfriars Lane, with only the Covenant members who supported Ravenscourt in attendance. It was a strange ceremony, blending mortal and vampire traditions, vows spoken in English and in a language Cordelia did not recognize, rings exchanged and blood shared, promises made that would bind them across lifetimes. Cordelia wore a gown of white silk that seemed to glow in the candlelight, and Ravenscourt wore black velvet that made him look like a figure from a medieval painting. When he lifted her veil and kissed her, his lips were cool but gentle, and she felt the strange tingling sensation again. That sense of something passing between them, some exchange of energy or promise that went deeper than mere words. The Blackwood Circle arrived the next evening, a delegation of 5 ancient vampire led by a man who introduced himself as Lord Casimir. They were shown into the study, where Ravenscourt and Cordelia waited, her hand clasped firmly in his. Casimir looked at their joined hands and smiled coldly. So the rumors are true. You have married your mortal agent, Silvius. How romantic. She is my wife, Casimir, and therefore under my protection. The old laws are clear on this point. You cannot touch her without declaring war on me. The old laws are also clear about revealing our nature to mortals, Casimir countered. You have violated the Covenant's charter, Silvius. Marriage does not absolve you of that. The charter is outdated, Ravenscourt said. It was written for a world that no longer exists. We must adapt, Casimir. We must find ways to coexist with humanity, or we will be swept away by the tide of change. Coexist? Casimir's voice dripped with contempt. We are predators, Silvius. They are prey. There is no coexistence, only the illusion of it, and you have shattered that illusion by bringing this woman into our confidence. I am standing right here, Cordelia said quietly. Perhaps you should address me directly, Lord Casimir, rather than speaking of me as though I were a piece of furniture. Casimir turned his cold gaze on her. Very well, Mrs. Ravenscourt. Tell me, do you understand what you have become part of? Do you comprehend the danger you represent to my kind? I understand that your kind has lived in secrecy for centuries, and that you fear exposure, Cordelia said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear that made her heart race. But I also understand that the world is changing, as my husband says. The railways are coming, the telegraph is spreading, science is advancing. How long do you think you can maintain your secrecy in a world where information travels at the speed of electricity? How long before someone else discovers what I have discovered, but without the Covenant's guidance? Would you not prefer to have allies among humanity, rather than leaving us to stumble upon your existence by accident? Casimir studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to Ravenscourt. She argues well, perhaps too well. How do we know she has not already betrayed us? How do we know she has not written letters, left evidence, prepared insurance against us? Because I have not, Cordelia said before Ravenscourt could answer. I have kept your secrets, Lord Casimir, because I understand their value. I have served the covenant faithfully, because I gave my word. And I have married Silvius Ravenscourt because I love him, not because I seek to exploit his nature or his power. If you doubt me, examine my memories. I will submit to it willingly, if it will prove my loyalty. No, Ravenscourt said sharply. That is not necessary. Yes, it is. Cordelia squeezed his hand, then released it and stepped forward, facing Casimir directly. I will not have this doubt hanging over us for the rest of my life, however long that may be. Examine my memories, Lord Casimir. See for yourself that I have kept faith with the covenant, and then leave us in peace. Casimir glanced at Ravenscourt, who nodded reluctantly. Then the ancient vampire reached out and placed his cold fingers on Cordelia's temples. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. A rushing, pulling feeling, as though her mind were being turned inside out. She saw her memories flickering past like pages in a book. Her first sight of Ravenscourt in the mirror, her arrival in London, the balls and dinners, the conversations in the study, the proposal, the wedding. All of it laid bare for Casimir's inspection. When he finally released her, she staggered, and Ravenscourt caught her, supporting her weight as the room spun. Well? Ravenscourt demanded. Are you satisfied? Casimir was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. She has kept faith. I see no evidence of betrayal, no hidden letters or contingency plans. She is exactly what she appears to be. A mortal woman who stumbled into our world and chose to embrace it rather than flee from it. Then you will leave her in peace? I will recommend to the circle that she be allowed to remain as your wife, under your protection. Casimir's expression softened slightly, the first hint of warmth Cordelia had seen from him. But understand, Silvius, this sets a precedent. If you are right, if we must adapt to coexist with humanity, then others will follow your example. The covenant will change, perhaps irrevocably. Are you prepared for that? I am, Ravenscourt said. The world is changing, Casimir. We can change with it, or we can fade into legend and dust. I choose change. Casimir nodded. Then I wish you well, both of you. May your marriage be long and fruitful, and may the future you envision come to pass. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Mrs. Ravenscourt. Your husband spoke of transformation, of the possibility that you might choose to become vampire. If you do make that choice, know that the circle will not oppose it. You have proven yourself worthy of our trust. That is no small thing. When the circle had departed, Cordelia sank into a chair, exhausted by the ordeal. Ravenscourt knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. You were magnificent, he said softly. Offering to let Casimir examine your memories, that was incredibly brave. It was necessary, Cordelia said. I will not live under suspicion, Silvius. If we are to have a future together, it must be built on trust. Now the circle knows I can be trusted, and we can move forward. Do you regret it? Any of it? She looked into his eyes and smiled. No, I regret nothing. I came to London expecting to lose everything, and instead I have gained more than I ever imagined. A husband who sees me as an equal, a purpose beyond managing an estate, a world far larger and stranger than I ever dreamed. How could I regret that? Ravenscourt lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. I love you, Cordelia Ravenscourt. I have loved you since I first watched you through that mirror, wrestling with impossible choices and refusing to break. I will love you for however long we have together, whether that is decades or centuries. I love you too, Cordelia said, and realized as she spoke the words that they were true. She loved this ancient creature who had given her freedom instead of chains, who had offered her partnership instead of domination, who had risked everything to protect her from his own kind. And I think, Silvius, that I would like to have centuries with you. I would like to see what the future holds, to watch the world change together. I would like to become vampire. His eyes widened. Are you certain? Transformation is irreversible, Cordelia. Once done, it cannot be undone. I am certain. I do not want to grow old while you remain unchanged. I do not want to leave you alone again after only a few decades together. Transform me, Silvius. Make me your wife in every sense, mortal and immortal, human and vampire, partner in this strange new world we are building. He pulled her into his arms and held her close. Then I will, but not tonight. Tonight let us simply be together, husband and wife, mortal and vampire, two souls who found each other against all odds. Tomorrow we will think about the future. Tonight we celebrate the present. And so they did, sitting together in the study as the candles burned low, talking of the past and the future, of the world that was and the world that would be. Outside, London slept, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place in a house on Blackfriars Lane. A revolution that would change the covenant forever, that would bridge the gap between mortal and vampire, that would prove that love could transcend even the boundaries of life and death. 5 years later, Cordelia stood in the same study, looking out the same window at a street transformed by gaslight and progress. She was vampire now, transformed in a ceremony that had been both painful and transcendent, and she had spent the intervening years working alongside Silvius to build a new covenant, one that embraced change rather than fearing it, that sought partnership with humanity rather than separation from it. The railway expansion had proceeded, and with it, the world had grown smaller and faster. But the covenant had adapted, had found new ways to maintain their secrecy, new methods of moving through a world of steam and steel. And Cordelia had been instrumental in that adaptation, using her understanding of both mortal and vampire societies to build bridges between them. Ashmore Hall still stood, managed now by a trust that ensured it would remain in the family for generations. Cordelia visited occasionally, walking through rooms that held memories of her mortal life, marveling at how much had changed and how much remained the same. But her true home was here, in this house on Blackfriars Lane, with the man who had watched her through a mirror and seen not a debtor or a pawn, but a partner. A woman who could stand beside him across centuries, who could help him navigate the changing world, who could love him despite, or perhaps because of, his impossible nature. Silvius came to stand beside her at the window, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About mirrors," Cordelia said, leaning into his embrace. "About how you watched me through one all those years ago. About how that single act of observation changed both our lives. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had refused my offer? If you had chosen to let the debt stand, to lose Ashmore Hall rather than come to London?" "Sometimes," Cordelia admitted, "but I think we would have found each other anyway, Silvius. Somehow, across the distance and the impossibility, we would have found each other. Some connections transcend circumstance. Some loves are written in the stars, or in the shadows, or in the silvered surface of a mirror that shows not what is, but what could be." He turned her to face him, his eyes, her eyes now, reflective and strange, glowing softly in the dimness. "I am glad you came to London, Cordelia Ravenscourt. I am glad you faced the impossible with courage. I am glad you chose to stay. I am glad you watched," she said, and kissed him, sealing the promise they had made 5 years ago and would keep for centuries to come, to face the changing world together, to build bridges between mortal and vampire, to prove that love could transcend even death itself. Outside, the city hummed with life and progress, with railways and telegraphs and the relentless march of modernity. But inside the house on Blackfriars Lane, two souls who had found each other against all odds stood together in the shadows, proof that even in a world of science and steel, there was still room for magic, for mystery, for love that defied every boundary and lasted beyond every ending.